Morning. Great, perfect. Good morning. My name is Liz Henderson, and I am a member of KU's Engagement and Professionalism Committee. As emergency department nurse, about to go through forensic nurse training, I could not be more thrilled to present Heidi Olson to you today. So when she's not having outdoor adventures with her pit bull Moxie, Heidi is an advocate and educator against human trafficking and exploitation. Heidi is here today to give us practical tools to protect the most vulnerable, the children of our communities. Growing up in southern New Mexico, Heidi was inspired to become a nurse at the young age of 7. Her older brother was hospitalized for a week, and she adored the nurses caring for him. Since then, she has been a nurse for 14 years and a forensic nurse for 8 years. Her career has brought her to becoming the founder and president of Paradigm Shift Training and Consulting, which equips healthcare workers with skills-based training to be able to identify human trafficking and exploitation. As a nurse, Heidi started seeing huge numbers of children impacted by exploitation and trafficking. She quickly realized healthcare workers could play a pivotal role in identifying victims and providing life-saving resources. Managing the SANE program, which is also known as the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner Program at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, Heidi reviewed over 1,500 pediatric sexual assault cases. Many of them were trafficking cases. In 2019, Heidi implemented an evidence-based screening process in the emergency department, which has resulted in hundreds of vulnerable children being identified as victims of exploitation. She also serves as an expert witness for the prosecution during trials for victims of sexual assault. Heidi won the Cry Purple Award this year, which is given to citizens who are doing outstanding anti-trafficking work in their communities. With that being said, I would like to turn it over to Heidi Olson. Heidi, we are honored to have you here with us today. Okay, do we also have a mic? I think that might be easier just testing this one.
You want to use those with the boxes?
Oh, got you.
If you want to hand them, I can give you another one.
It's okay. Just give me a second. I didn't wear the right outfit for this kind of mic. Okay, can you guys hear me? All right. So I am dear friends with a woman named Megan. Megan was trafficked for 30 years, 30. She first started being trafficked by her dad when she was about 1.5 years old. And then she ended up being trafficked by boyfriends, pimps throughout her lifetime until she was about 30 when she finally was able to escape her situation. So a lifetime of trauma. She's doing very well now. But as I've talked to Megan, and I have her permission to share this story, I asked her about her experience with healthcare workers. Were you ever seen by healthcare workers? What did that look like? And of course she laughed like, yes, I was probably seen 60, 70 times by healthcare workers, never recognized as a trafficking victim. And she told me a story and it guts me every time I hear her say it. And it is very much, as hard as the story is going to be to hear, I think there's hope in it because we can change the story. Once we are armed with the correct information, we can intervene. And I think that that's what the story is going to show. The nurse she interacted with didn't know. And after this presentation, you are going to know. You're going to know what to look for, how to speak up, how this impacts our patients. So when Megan was 16, she was being trafficked by a pimp. She was forced to do a pornography shoot. And during that, an object was inserted into her genitals and she couldn't get it out. So her pimp allowed her to go to an urgent care where he basically said, okay, I want this to be fixed because you're my product. So I'll allow you to get medical care right now. But of course, she's not allowed to say anything. So she's in the urgent care for this really embarrassing thing. Of course, she's not saying anything to, the nurses, just kind of keeping her eyes down, answering, really vague answers. And she said the nurse was really kind to me. And she said, I was exhausted. I wanted to be done. This had been 16 years of my life of being harmed and abused. And so she's like, I was going to say something. I was finally going to tell someone that I wanted out. And she said, as the nurse walked out of my room, I heard her making fun of me in the hallway to other nurses about why I was there. All right, I've worked in the hospital for a long time. I know we do this as nurses. We see something hard, we don't know how to handle it, and then we make a joke about it, not at all realizing the deep impact it may have on our patient. So she hears the nurse saying that. Do you think she said anything to her nurse? No, of course not, right? Trust was broken in that moment. She was trafficked for 14 more years after that moment. If that nurse had had the education, the insight to see what was going on, that could have changed the trajectory of Megan's life in that moment. And we have the power to do that as healthcare workers. So I want to leave you with some hope that we can absolutely impact this really dark, really hard issue in a massive way if we know what to do. So let's jump in. If I can get my slides to advance. Okay, as you can tell, this is going to be kind of a rough talk. We're going to talk about some things that are really graphic. It might be triggering. If you need to take a break, step out, whatever, please do. I want to empower you that you do not have to sit through this if this is really hard content to take in. Every single story I tell you, a case study is of a real kid being trafficked in Kansas City. I don't have to make up stories because there are so many kids in our community being exploited. So on the flip side, so obviously Megan was missed in that moment by that nurse, but I, as a nurse, have missed patients who were being trafficked. So as a nurse, and probably like many of you, I didn't receive education on human trafficking when I went through nursing school. Nobody even said those words to me. I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how to identify it. Then I became a forensic nurse where you think you would get education about human trafficking. Nope, not a word. I think maybe someone said the words force, fraud, and coercion. What does that even mean? I have no idea. I go on my way being a forensic nurse. Have no idea what human trafficking looks like. I'm like, okay, it's happening in Cambodia or Thailand or somewhere else. It's not happening to kids that I'm seeing. So as a brand new baby SANE nurse, I got called to our emergency department in Kansas. So I'm sure as all of you are aware, we have an ER in Missouri. We have one in Kansas. So I'm in Kansas and an ER physician calls me and says, hey, I have a 16-year-old here and something is off. And kudos to him for recognizing that. So I'm like, okay, I'll come in and see her. So her story was she had been in foster care. She had been living in a group home. And 6 months before, she met this 23-year-old on Facebook. So her and this 23-year-old female are talking on Facebook. Eventually, the 23-year-old picks her up from her group home and takes her to Indiana. So she's been a missing person for 6 months. And so I am asking her questions, you know, what were you doing in Indiana? Were you going to school? Did you have a job? And she's just like, oh, just chilling, right? Giving me zero information about what's been going on. What I find out is the night before, her and this 23-year-old had been pulled over in Indiana and they had drugs and weapons in their car. So the police arrest the 23-year-old and my patient gives the police a fake name and a fake age. She says that she's an adult. The police at least had the insight to match her picture to a database of missing kids and realize she's a minor. She belongs in Kansas City. So they bring her back down here to grandma. So she's staying with grandma. It's a weekend. I'm now seeing her and she wants STD testing. That's why she's in the ER. So I look through her chart and I realized we had seen her a year before at the age of 15 when she was found in a hotel with an adult male. And it was not flagged as trafficking then. So huge missed opportunity in that moment. So I'm asking her all kinds of questions and she doesn't want to talk to me. She wants to do her testing. She wants to go. She is pissed off, right? Like she's done with me. So she at least lets me do a head to toe assessment. And this kid, her body is screaming, I'm being trafficked. She has tattoos she won't tell me about. She has cigarette burns down her inner thighs. She has horrific genital trauma. She has 4 STDs. That's a lot for a 16-year-old to have, for anyone to have. So I'm deeply concerned. Everything in my gut is saying, I think this kid's being sold for sex. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. No one has ever talked to me about this before. So I sit down, look her in her eyes, and I say literally the worst thing I could have ever said. Like, are you being trafficked? And she's like, no, I want to get out of here. Like, what are you talking about, weirdo? We'll talk about how to approach this, but trafficking victims are not going to identify as trafficking victims. You're never going to have a patient, whether they're a kid or an adult, that comes into your healthcare setting and says, help me, I'm being trafficked. It's never going to happen. Just like Megan's story. She didn't come in and say that. And so I think that's what we're waiting for. Someone's going to run into our ER and be like, help me, I was being held against my will. That's never what it looks like. And if we use that terminology, they don't identify with it. So of course she tells me no and is like, get out of my face, I don't want to go. So I grab our social worker and I'm like, I think this kid is being sold for sex. I think she's going to run. I don't know what to do. So we call the human trafficking hotline. It's a national number. And they're like, great, we'll get back to you in a couple of days. Days, I'm in our ER, right? I'm like, we have to discharge her. I can't wait for a couple of days. So they're like, we'll try calling law enforcement. So I call law enforcement in Indiana and they're like, yeah, she's back in your guys' care. Not our problem. Won't take a report. So I call local law enforcement. They're like, yeah, the crime didn't happen here. Not our problem. Won't take a report. I'm saying trafficking every single time on these calls. So I call Child Protective Services because I'm like, this kid is in your custody. Like, yeah, it's the weekend. So we'll just see her family court on Monday. And so she's a ward of the state in Missouri. I'm in Kansas. This happened in Indiana, right? So it's already a jurisdictional nightmare. So I'm like, I think this kid's gonna run. And I have no idea what to do as a nurse. So basically we safety plan her to go home with grandma. And what do you think happened? She ran, of course, right? So I later find out from the FBI that they think she is in fact being trafficked again. And I have no idea if that kid is alive today. No idea. We failed her. Every system that was in place, from us not educating our staff to not having a protocol in place, to everyone just reacting to this situation, to law enforcement, to children's division, like no one knew how to work together. It was a total disaster when we should have protected this kid. And this happens all the time. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen this scenario play out in different healthcare settings. And I think part of it is we just don't know what to do in these situations. It's not that anyone has ill intent or that we don't care. We've never been educated or thought through what does this process look like. So we have lots of work to do as healthcare workers. And in fact, research bears this out. So several studies have been done on this, but one study that is really fascinating shows that about 90% of trafficking victims come into contact with us as healthcare workers while they're being trafficked. That's a lot of people. And yet right now, only about 4% of trafficking reports are coming from hospitals. That is a massive gap. 90%, we are only reporting 4%. We are not recognizing this at all. So as I've started my business, I've gone around the United States and Canada trying to help hospitals figure out, all right, how do we educate on this? How do we create protocols? How do we screen for this? And what I've run into is a massive tangle of red tape, right? So when we talk to hospitals about, this is important, we're encountering these victims, this is a priority. It's like, oh, is this gonna make money for us? Oh, nope, okay, never mind. This is gonna go on the back burner. So there's lots of reasons why. One is a lot of people will say, well, we're not seeing trafficking victims. Why would we prioritize this? Because we don't see it. Oh, you absolutely see it. It's just that we mislabel it a lot of times. Of course, again, a lot of places have a lack of training, or basically they'll say, okay, we'll do a 20-minute awareness training with our staff. As you're gonna see today, an hour is like, we're barely touching the surface of this. Truly, you need really like about 8 hours for your staff to really feel competent in this because it's complex. And so, hospitals don't dedicate time to it. There's no protocol in place, so it's just like my situation. Everyone's reacting to it. A lot of times we don't use evidence-based practices. So for example, I know we're in Kansas, but Missouri enacted this law a couple of years ago where we have to have these posters in place in our hospitals that have this big red hand that say stop human trafficking and have a phone number on it. Do you know how many trafficking victims have sat in a lobby of an ER and called that number because of that poster? 0, because that type of thing does not work with this population. But no one bothered to ask a survivor, is this a good idea before we pass this law? We do the same thing in hospitals. Let's implement this thing, but we're not actually going to ask this population if this works. Of course, it's not a priority in many places. We're already so short-staffed. We're all burned out. We're just adding one more thing to our staff's plate. And then I've heard places say, okay, we know it's a problem. We have nowhere to send victims, so we really don't want to open that can of worms because we don't know what to do. So there's lots and lots of complications of why this does not get prioritized. I think the other piece is, again, for most of us, we learn about human trafficking through social media, on movies, on TV. So we think trafficking looks like one thing, and it's not at all what it looks like. So I'm sure, seen things on social media that are like, someone's following me and my kids are on Target or IKEA. That is not how traffickers are trafficking kids. They're not abducting people or kids and trafficking them. It never looks like that. I have seen thousands of kids who have been sexually abused and trafficked in our community. I've never seen an abduction that involved trafficking, ever. So if you think about it, you're a trafficker, you want this person to trust you. You don't want to have to tie them up with a rope. You want them to be loyal to you. So you create a relationship with them. If you abduct someone, you're inherently creating distrust, right? You're taking them against their will, and so they're not going to trust you. But if you pretend to be someone's boyfriend, if you love them, if you groom them, they're going to feel loyal to you. So where do you think that's happening? Online, right? It's easy. There's no parents paying attention. There's no one around. They can easily find that vulnerable kid who's like, I'm having a horrible day. Things are going terrible with my parents. Awesome. That's the kid I want to start talking to. So again, you see images like this. If you Google human trafficking, and as healthcare workers are thinking, okay, that's what I should look for. This sensationalized girl who has makeup smeared down her face. She's chained up. Your victims are never going to like this in a healthcare setting. They're not going to come in and appear this way. They may look totally, quote unquote, normal. They may be dressed appropriately. We definitely cannot go off of stereotypes. And then again, sort of this abduction piece, that it's someone who's being snatched off the street. I promise you're seeing trafficking, and it does not look like any of this. So when we talk about trafficking, you kind of have to think about, of course, you don't have to memorize the legal definition, but there's, with adults, certain things that have to be in place for something to count as trafficking. So if we think about how trafficking is different than sexual assault, there's an exchange that's taking place. So the way it helps in my brain is you have a vulnerable person, you have a trafficker who takes advantage of their vulnerability so they can make money off of them, whether it's through a sex act, a labor act, some type of forced criminality. So there's lots of ways traffickers are abusing, manipulating their victims, and making money off of them. So this person is not consenting. You can't consent to being trafficked. But with kids, the threshold is even lower. With kids, you don't have to prove that there's any type of coercion or manipulation. If there is any sex act for anything of value with someone under the age of 18, it's considered trafficking in the United States. So say you have a kid who is on the run, and you have someone who's saying, hey, you can stay at my house, you can sleep on my couch if you give me a blowjob. Now we're talking about trafficking, because a thing of value is staying at their house, they're asking for a sex act, we're talking about an exchange here. And so that is trafficking. There doesn't have to be a pimp involved, there doesn't have to be a trafficker if we're talking about a child. So like Liz was saying, I grew up in southern New Mexico. I saw lots of kids as a nurse who were being trafficked. We never applied this law to them, right? That's a juvenile delinquent. That's a kid who's making bad choices. They're exchanging sex acts to survive. We should have been calling it trafficking, and we did not. So this is what it looks like in real life to have a trafficking victim come in for healthcare. So this was a real 16-year-old patient. She came in after a sexual assault. So she had been at a party the night before, she had been drinking, she was raped by a peer, came in for treatment. I think historically as healthcare workers, we would only hyper focus on that. Okay, what do we need to do? A rape kit, STI testing, what does this kid need? But we screened her for trafficking. I do not think she would have disclosed any of this had we not asked the right questions, and here's what she told us. She's in foster care. She's been sexually assaulted multiple times in her life. She had an abortion at the age of 11. That alone should be a gigantic red flag that something is off with this kid. She's had over 60 consensual sex partners. She tells us she's been making money on OnlyFans. Do you guys know what OnlyFans is? So it's a pornography site, essentially, where people can subscribe to you. So they're giving you money to see your content. She's a child. She cannot consent to that, right? So now we have money being exchanged for sex acts. That's trafficking in and of itself. She tells us she needs the money so she can buy drugs. So again, huge red flag. And her 17-year-old boyfriend has been sextorting her. So he's been taking her images off OnlyFans and saying, hey, I'm going to send these to everyone at school or to your parents or to whoever if you don't let me have some of the money that you're making from OnlyFans. So she's got multiple crimes that are happening against her. This is trafficking. Again, this doesn't look like the kid who was abducted and brought in off the street, right? This was the kid who came in for sexual assault, who never would have disclosed these things had we not asked her about them. So human trafficking is very difficult to quantify. I don't know how many people are being trafficked around the world or in Kansas City because we are struggling to identify it. Victims don't self-identify. Professionals are having a hard time. I mean, police have trouble identifying it. Teachers have trouble identifying it. We don't really know. We can estimate to the best of our ability. So we know about 40 to 50 million people are being trafficked worldwide. That's a lot of people. We do know it's the fastest growing crime in the world. It is not going away anytime. This is so relevant to us as healthcare workers. It's not like you're only going to see this once in a while. You're going to see it all the time once you realize what to look for. We know that many people are actually trafficked by an intimate partner or a family member first. So again, the stranger danger thing is very much a myth. Of course it happens, but rarely. That a lot of people are trafficked by someone they know first, and then maybe they end up being trafficked by a pimp or someone else. We know that males are actually trafficked at way higher rates than we previously thought. So in the past, it was kind of always this, it's females who are being trafficked, it's males who are buyers. And a few studies that actually come out in the last year showing that males are being trafficked way higher rates and that there are female buyers. We know that sex trafficking alone makes about $150 billion a year. It is a booming business, and that matters because if we're talking about supply and demand, like a business model, if we know it's making a profit, that there's a lot of demand for it, which means there's a lot of supply. There's a lot of bodies who are being sold. We know that the vast majority of people in sex work, and I put that in quotes because I hate that term. The reason I hate that term is because we know about 90% of people in prostitution or in sex work are being trafficked. They meet the definition of trafficking. Prostitution and sex trafficking are almost always the same thing. And I think in our culture, we separate them. Oh, sex work is empowering, yada, yada. And we don't have time to go into all the nuances of it, but the reality is there's usually force, fraud, or coercion, or a mass amount of childhood sexual abuse and trauma behind sort of what's going on when someone is in sex work. So if you have a patient that's an adult that says, I'm in prostitution, I'm in sex work, your brain needs to be thinking, is this trafficking? What do we know about Kansas City? So what we know from most studies, and there was a study done in Kansas City that bears this out, is that about 15% of the male population at any given time is actively looking to pay for sex. So again, thinking about supply and demand, if we have a bunch of buyers who are saying, hey, we want to pay for sex, there are going to be a whole bunch of people who are being sold for sex. So about 15% of the male population in Kansas City equates to over 100,000 men at any given time who are looking to pay for sex. How many people are being trafficked here? Thousands and thousands, I would guess. There was a study done by the FBI in Independence, and they specifically were looking at kids who were being sold for sex. So they put sex ads online, and there's certain terminology sort of in that world where you can indicate it's a child being sold. And obviously these were fake decoy ads, but in 24 hours, over 500 men had responded to knowingly wanting to pay for sex with children in our city. So we know the demand is high for kids. We know the demand is high to pay for adults as well. We also know the United States is the #1 consumer of sex worldwide. We're driving demand. So not only do we have a lot of people looking to pay for sex in our country, we have men who are leaving the country to go to other countries to create demand. So what are traffickers looking for? Who is a patient that they would want to exploit? Who would sort of be an easy target, so to speak? They're looking for vulnerabilities. They're looking for a kid who does not feel seen or loved because it makes it easy for them to create that bond. So any kid with a history of sexual abuse, that is actually the #1 predictor of who will be trafficked as a child, is if they have a history of sexual abuse. Now, not every kid who's sexually abused will be trafficked, but that is the commonality we see with every kid, both male or female, who is being trafficked. Kids who are in foster care, of course, a kid's age. If you are too young to understand what's happening to you, like in Megan's case, so she and I have talked about that, and she said, I grew up being trafficked. I didn't know that life could be different. Like there was no life before trafficking for me. That was my norm. Unstable living conditions, of course, we know gender minorities are very vulnerable. Kids who are on the run or who are homeless, of course, if you can't meet your basic needs, you have to do something to survive. Kids with developmental delays, substance use disorders, or sometimes traffickers purposefully get kids addicted to drugs or substances so that it's a way to control them. We also know kids with a mental health history, or they end up with a mental health diagnosis because they're being trafficked. Kids who are online, which we'll talk about in a second, and really any kid that has unprocessed trauma is going to be vulnerable to a trafficker. So let's talk about sexual abuse for a second. Why does this create such a big vulnerability with kids? So like I said, almost all kids who are trafficked already have a history of childhood sexual abuse. And if you think about it, part of it is because this child has already been groomed by someone they trusted and sexually violated. So imagine you have an 8-year-old who's been sexually abused for years by her dad. He's been grooming her, he's been hurting her, and he's saying things like, don't tell anyone. I can't help it. It's because you're so beautiful. I'll buy you something if you don't say anything to your mom. Well, imagine a trafficker comes along when she's 8 and he's saying the same thing to her. Don't tell anyone that I'm doing this. You just have to have sex with this one person because I love you. It'll help me make ends meet. Do you think it's going to feel abnormal to that kid who's already been sexually abused her whole life? No, it's going to feel normal. So that helps traffickers when kids have already been groomed by their families. We, again, know a lot of kids who are sexually abused when that's not processed, when they're not protected, when they're not believed. How do you cope with that when you're a little kid? You don't have the internal resources to be able to handle that. So we see a lot of kids who end up turning to substances to numb that pain, which makes them more vulnerable to traffickers. We know that trauma impairs their prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that helps decision making. And we know that a lot of kids who experience sexual abuse do not disclose for years. Actually, there are lots of people who don't disclose until adulthood, right? So there may be a kid who is acting out, who, I'll give you an example. We had a patient a few years ago. We started seeing her when she was 13. I think we probably saw her 5 times in 1 year for sexual assault and trafficking. She would run away. She would meet up with these adult men she was seeing online. They would give her money for sex acts. I remember hearing a social worker be like, this kid is a sex addict. And I'm like, she is 13. I would guess something horrible happened to her, right? So of course she's not disclosing. Finally, 5th, 6th time we're seeing her. Oh, guess what? Grandpa has been sexually abusing her whole life. Of course, I think before we chalk this up to, this is a kid making bad decisions, the logical conclusion should be something terrible is happening to this child if they are acting out this way. So this very much sort of weaves into another huge vulnerability we're seeing, which is the fact that so many kids today are viewing pornography and it is setting their sexual template and it is making them vulnerable to being exploited. So what we know in looking at research, but also just anecdotally, I hear this hundreds of times from parents, from people I'm working with, from patients, is that kids are seeing pornography at really young ages. If a kid has a device and it's not filtered, it's not monitored, at any given time, they're about 2 clicks away from pornography. Pornography is everywhere. It is on social media. It is easy to find. It's a lot of times unintentional. The kids are just doing an innocent search and pornography pops up. We know from looking at research, kids as young as 7 have been exposed to porn. I've seen kids much younger who are frequently viewing pornography. I'm going to tell you a story about that in a second. This one study in particular that was done a couple of years ago showed that more than half of 11 to 13-year-olds in the study had already seen pornography. So at really young ages, they're seeing it. 82% of it was an accident. They weren't actively seeking it out. They were doing homework or whatever it may be. The porn industry is seeking them out. The younger you can expose a kid to porn, the more likely they will be a lifelong user. So there's an incentive for them to see this. Parents have no clue, and this continues to be true. So about 75% of parents in this study said, oh no, my kids are not looking at porn. When in fact, over half of them said, oh yeah, I am. And I think this is the most heartbreaking part of the study, is that over half the kids said, we don't want to see this. We want to be locked out of these sites because it's violent, because it's scary, because I don't know what to do with this. And we are not doing anything about that at all. I can say in kind of talking to legislators, everyone's kind of like, yeah, not a problem, not a problem. Someone else can deal with it. And so kids continue to have unlimited access to this information. It's a big deal because pornography today is not like Playboy from 40 years ago. It is not just kids seeing people having sex online. It's not just them seeing a naked body. The amount of violent pornography that exists online is skyrocketing. And so what we see, again, in looking at research, is the levels of violent porn, gore porn, child sexual abuse, or what we used to call child porn, child sexual abuse images, and racist acts depicted in porn have increased exponentially. Because what the porn industry is doing is they're setting the algorithms to, they think it's a man in his 30s who's searching for this. Well, this guy's been looking at internet porn for 10, 20 years. So he's gonna wanna see something really violent, really horrific. So he gets that continued dopamine response in his brain. An 8-year-old is not looking for that, but that's what they're gonna see because of how it's been set up. Of course, this is all free, it's all anonymous. And so it's not like these kids are having to put in a credit card to see this horrific content. It is readily available. What's really scary is that what's happening in porn is females in porn are being directed to act like they like it, to express pleasure when there's aggression directed at them or violence. So what is that teaching kids? If you're an 8-year-old boy and you're watching this and this girl's being strangled and called names and she's saying she likes it, well, what are you supposed to do when you have sex? You're supposed to do that, right? And if you're a female, you should like that. You should ask a guy to strangle you. You should be okay with them ejaculating in your face because that's what you're watching in pornography. What we see in mainstream porn, so again, this is not considered hardcore porn anymore. What a kid is gonna see in 2 seconds of being on Pornhub is rape. It's dehumanizing. It is what we would consider torture. It is so, so violent. There's a complete lack of empathy. There's not like anyone caring about mutuality or eye contact or consent. It's mostly males who are dominating a female in a very degrading way. So what a kid is going to see in any mainstream scene, kind of the given theme with pornography is really rough anal sex. They're going to see gagging. So I've seen this a lot with patients. I just took care of a patient who was assaulted a few weeks ago, and she said that she was gagged so violently by the person who was assaulting her, she threw up. This is what happens in mainstream porn today. And the people don't stop in porn, right? There's no, hey, I see you're struggling and I'm going to stop. It's continued. It's about the male pleasure in these scenes. Strangulation is skyrocketing because that's what you almost see in every scene with porn. So kids think strangulation is totally normal. I've talked to many girls who have been sexually assaulted, and when I ask them about strangulation, they're like, oh yeah, I thought he was being sexy. Sexy, you can die from strangulation, right? But because they see it in pornography, they think it's normal. We see multiple men penetrating one woman, horrific name calling. A huge theme is ejaculation on the face, or what they call the money shot. And sort of the newest thing with pornography is multiple men ejaculating on one woman's face so she can't even see afterwards. Like the degradation is so horrific. But again, you're 8 years old, your brain is not fully formed. How do you make sense of what you're seeing? It's teaching kids that sexual violence is normal, that you should like doing this. Unfortunately, this is sex education for kids today. Most kids see violent porn before anyone talks to them about sex. So it's setting their sexual template for this is what is normal before an adult talks to them. Unfortunately, kids are seeing this at school. So this study just came out this year. 1 in 3 kids in the study said they have looked at porn at school. 44% of them said they use their school issued devices to access porn. So I think a lot of times we think, okay, our kids have a device at school, surely it's filtered. That is absolutely not a guarantee. When my nephew was in 1st grade, I remember his mom calling in a panic and saying, okay, they all have iPads in their classroom, and they heard some of the 5th graders on the playground talking about boobs. So this 1st grader next to her son types boobs into his iPad during class because he's curious. Porn pops up. Now, how many 1st graders have been exposed to this horrific content at school, right? You assume there's filters, but there's not always. So we took care of a patient a couple years ago who was 12. She had gone to school that morning. She had been texting a 16-year-old male. Instead of going into the building, she ended up leaving after her parents dropped her off, meeting this 16-year-old in a parking lot, and he horrifically raped her. It was an awful, awful situation. School realized she wasn't at home, so they called parents. Parents found her, brought her to the hospital. As we started talking to her about what was going on, she was swearing up and down, he didn't sexually assault me, even though she was 12 and obviously can't consent to this. It was fine. I wanted to do that. I didn't care that he strangled me, blah, blah, blah. As we're talking, she said, oh yeah, my parents gave me an iPad when I was 5. I saw pornography. I've been looking at it and masturbating to it every single day for the last 7 years. She's 12. Now, does she think what happened to her is violence? No, because she's been looking at it for 7 years, right? So how has that affected her brain? She's clearly addicted to this because she's saying to us, I can't not do this every day now, right? So now her brain has created this chemical dependence on pornography, which absolutely, it releases tons of dopamine in the brain. And so unfortunately, we're seeing lots of cases like this. Research also shows us this, that kids are more susceptible to what they see in pornography. So the more they watch it, the more likely they are to act out what they're seeing. And another study was done with abusers under the age of 21. So clearly, young abusers that were probably starting to abuse as minors, and they cited pornography as a factor that led them to abuse other children. So we know there's absolutely a correlation here. We also know there's lots of other long-term impacts that are terrible when kids are exposed to pornography. So like I said earlier, the younger a kid is exposed to pornography, the more likely they'll be addicted. The porn industry knows that. They want lifelong users because eventually you'll have to start paying for the hardcore stuff. They are more likely to engage in forced sex. They are more likely to become juvenile sex offenders. We're seeing this play out in real time. So we keep track of the ages of our perpetrators at Children's Mercy. And what we've seen over the last, it's been probably 8 years now, is that a huge percentage of our perpetrators, so those committing sexual assaults, are 11 to 15-year-old males. How often is pornography a factor in that? I would guess a huge percentage of the time. And these types of things, I'm going to show you a statistic in a second, are true in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, and other countries that are collecting the same data. if a kid has a phone, there is a likelihood that pornography is teaching them what to do, and it is resulting in sexual violence. We know kids who look at online porn are more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. They're more likely to have disturbed family relationships and more likely to have relationships problems with their peers. So there are not a lot of upsides to this. We also know it changes their brains and their bodies. So pornography has been shown to rewire the brain so that over time we start to prefer images over people. Think about the long-term implications of that if you have been viewing pornography since you were 10 years old. I've heard horror stories of adult men who are having sex with a female and having to watch porn at the same time so they can keep an erection because their brain is so addicted to that content. Think about how degrading that would be to be in a relationship with someone like that because their body is dependent on this material. So to that point, today, 1 in 4 new erectile dysfunction patients are under the age of 40. This was almost unheard of before internet porn existed. Another study showed that about 1/3 of adolescent males had erectile dysfunction or some type of sexual dysfunction. Here's my question as healthcare workers. Is anyone asking adolescent males about this? Like porn use, problematic porn use, erectile dysfunction? My guess is probably not. And yes, I think a huge percentage of them probably are struggling and not saying anything because it's embarrassing, because they're ashamed, because they don't know they can ask for help. So this came from a researcher in Australia. She said boys are having their sexual arousal conditioned by depictions of extreme cruelty all before their first sexual experience and even their first kiss, which is true. I've heard lots of stories of girls that are saying, yeah, I like this boy. He asked me to give him a blowjob before he ever kissed me. This is very backwards, but this is what porn teaches you. It's about objectification. It's about gratification. It's not about having a mutual experience with someone. How is this affecting girls? It's affecting them in pretty horrifying ways as well. So as we were talking about OnlyFans, I met with a school resource officer. This was actually in a small town in Idaho. And so you would think there's probably not a lot of this going on there. Wrong. He said, what I hear the girls in the hallway saying is only ugly girls get diplomas. Meaning when I turn 18, I don't have to finish high school because I can join OnlyFans. I can do porn. I can make thousands of dollars and that can be my career. If being hot is all that matters about me, because that's what I'm being taught, if I'm already sexting people and everybody's already seen me naked, why can't this be my career, right? So they are thinking this is a legitimate option. But what I've also heard that's kind of even more frightening in some ways is I've heard boys say, okay, look, I want to have a girlfriend. I want to have sex with this girl that I'm interested in. And she's saying, I won't have sex with you unless you strangle me. I won't have sex with you unless you ejaculate on my face. Because what they're saying is, I'm not going to have vanilla sex. I want to have porn sex because that gives me street cred, right? Like that makes me cool. I'm not like those other girls. This is terrifying, right? That not only are girls saying, I'm okay with it, I'm not going to have sex with you unless you treat me this way. So it's setting a very confusing template for kids. We see there's absolutely a huge relation to porn and sexual assault in kids who are committing sexual assault. So the study in the UK showed a 400% rise in child-on-child sexual assault. It's very similar in the United States. So I saw a case a few years ago that I had no idea how to make sense of. Like it made me just go home and have this like existential crisis of like, what is happening? So this was a 14-year-old girl. She was hanging out with friends after school in a park. She went to a bathroom. 3 boys followed her into the bathroom and gang raped her. Horrible, horrific, traumatic. The boys walk out of the bathroom, and of course she has to like compose herself. She has to walk out of the bathroom at some point. So she finally gets herself together, takes a deep breath, walks out. And when she walks out, all her peers and those boys cheered. They cheered. They were cheering when she walked out like it was some badge of honor that she was gang raped by these 3 boys. How and why does that happen, right? Like I couldn't wrap my mind around it. But as I started to think about if everyone is looking at violent pornography, this isn't registering as a sexual assault. This is normal. This is what we're seeing all the time, a gangbang. Good for her, this happened to her. No one told their parents. No one reported this to the police, right? So pornography is absolutely playing into this bystander effect. This is normal, good for her that happened, when in fact it was this horrifically traumatic thing that obviously she told her parents. We made a police report, but it is extremely alarming, the desensitization that we're seeing related to this. It's also making kids more susceptible to being exploited and trafficked. So let me explain this. We have tons of kids who are being exposed to pornography at a really young age, which is desensitizing them. Then we see that because there isn't that red flag when someone online says, hey, send me a naked picture of yourself, because they've been looking at nude images over and over, and everyone's sending it to them and asking for nude images. They're like, okay, I'll send it to you. Then they send it to someone on social media, and suddenly people on social media are like, you're hot. If you send me another video like that, I'll give you a gift card. Right now we're talking about trafficking because we have this exchange, but it feels normal to them. So it's like, okay, well, not a big deal. I'm already sending these kind of pictures. Everyone already looks at this kind of stuff. So, all right, I'll send this to you if you'll send me that. And now they start to be groomed into trafficking. We see it happening over and over and over again, where they're not recognizing at all that they are being exploited because it's been so normalized. So we took care of an 11-year-old a couple years ago. She was sexually assaulted by a 33-year-old male. And when the police found her in the apartment with this 33-year-old that she had met on Snapchat, they brought her to the hospital. We were doing a sexual assault kit on her, and grandma was looking through her phone, and grandma said there were dozens of adult men who were soliciting her on her phone. Oh, you're cute. I'll give you $200 if you have sex with me. If you send me this, I'll give you this. She's 11 years old. She looked like an 11-year-old, right? So again, we're seeing this trend all the time, which is horrifying that these adult predators and traffickers are taking advantage of kids. So technology is a huge piece of this. We did a study with the Missouri Highway Patrol a few years ago during COVID, where we saw this huge spike in online enticement. So predators knew kids were at home on devices, started asking them for nude pictures, started asking them to meet in person. These online enticements for kids went up 97% during COVID. What we found is that it took about 8 days from a predator meeting a kid online to convincing them to meet in person. That is horrifying. That is not very long. So I'm going to show you this video. And again, it just shows how easy it is for traffickers and predators to groom kids online. If you are watching this on Zoom, you may not be able to hear this, and I apologize, but I can send a link out afterwards if you want to watch it.
I never thought I would be chasing child predators. It was 2 years ago when our team intercepted conversations between a 12-year-old girl and a 40-year-old pedophile. He wasn't just talking to her. He was abusing her, coercing her, collecting images and videos, and no one in her life, her parents, sixth grade teacher, or friends, knew what was happening. I have a sixth grader of my own. I have 3 kids, actually, but you don't have to be a parent to be devastated by this. I work for a tech company that uses artificial intelligence to detect issues like grooming and sexual predation, and this is something we see constantly. These abuses are occurring quietly and mostly go unreported, and we want parents to know exactly what we know about what happens online. So we made a plan.
A man has been arrested for allegedly raping a 15-year-old that he met over Snapchat.
Instagram has become the #1 social media site, the top of the free download.
We've also seen firsthand the predatory symbiotic relationship that exists between Instagram and Snapchat.
We would create a fictitious 15-year-old girl, complete with a believable social media identity, put her online, and document how long it would take for a predator to approach her. But creating a person out of thin air is complicated. We needed photos, but we knew we couldn't use an actual teenager. It would have to be someone on our team. I'm 37, but our graphic designers assured me that with the wonders of photo manipulation, they could magically make me look over 2 decades younger. We bought clothes and accessories, studied body language and facial expressions. We methodically covered and edited signs of aging, wrinkles, weight shifts, and stretch marks. Meanwhile, we coordinated with federal, state, and local law enforcement. Then we built a story around her, a history, a family, a social circle. Libby was born in 2004 and is a sophomore who recently moved to Indiana. We created multiple online accounts for Libby, prominently displayed her age, and posted typical teen content. We even created virtual friends for Libby who would comment on her posts. With everything in place, we would launch the project, give it a few months, and see if anyone would buy it. So we hit the button, and Libby went live. Within the first hour of posting on Libby's accounts, 7 adult men contacted her. By the end of 9 days, that number was 92. The conversations ranged in severity from making sexual comments to sharing and requesting explicit photos and videos to manipulation and threats. The onslaught was so massive, it took 5 of us playing Libby full-time to keep up. We decided to move off-site where we could scale up the operation and gather as much information and evidence as possible. Since Libby is 15, men might try to falsely justify their actions towards her because of her proximity to adulthood. Would parents question, where's the bar? Would a 13-year-old face the same barrage of predators? A 12-year-old? How young could it possibly go? The graphics team transformed me into 11-year-old Bailey. Bailey is afraid of the dark. She hasn't had her first crush yet. She's still prepubescent. A parent might assume Bailey would be insulated from any sort of predatory attack. We launched our 11-year-old persona online.
444 and go. One like from a guy whose profile photo is a penis.
So
let's say
1 minute and 7 seconds. We have a message request.
Although this, sorry, 2 more requests just came in. How much time? A minute and 40 seconds?
Yeah.
How old
How old are you? You go to the profile, you know that that is a child. It also says in the profile that the child is in 6th grade.
Another one.
It's just lighting up, like the inbox is just boom, 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 boom.
An incoming video call in less than 5 minutes.
I can't see you. Don't be shy.
They all say don't be shy.
Few parents know just how dangerous these platforms are for so many kids. So we brought some on site so they could see for themselves. 11-year-old Bailey's persona was approached with an even more disturbing level of manipulation and requests. While the majority of the abuse happened from a distance, our child profiles also received requests to meet up in person, especially our 15-year-old persona. 28-year-old Keith was relentless. Like the others, he took no issue with Libby's age. He shared explicit videos of himself. He treated the virginity of an underage girl as a prize to be stolen. It was a tough decision, but if Keith wanted to meet Libby in person, we would let him. We synced up with our law enforcement contacts, and within 24 hours, we were on the ground and ready to meet. We already had evidence of what he had done online, but was he willing to carry things out in real life? We knew 37-year-old me attempting to pass for 15-year-old Libby would be a challenge. But I would wear a hat, a lot of makeup, and a big sweatshirt and see if he showed up.
Oh, hi. Good. How are you? Nice to meet you too. Hey.
How you doing?
Good.
Okay, this is what I think you expected.
Well, yeah.
You want upstairs?
Wait, so do you want to go for a walk first?
Why are you not trying to rush upstairs?
What was that?
Why are you not trying to rush upstairs?
I don't know. I'm a little nervous.
Let's go upstairs, then don't be nervous.
I've never done anything like this before, so I'm a little nervous.
The first for everything.
Yeah.
Don't be. I'm not gonna rush you. You can go upstairs and talk.
Okay. Have you ever?
Shy.
You okay with me being 15?
I like Shouldn't say, make it honest. I don't want it to say what feeling. You know what I'm saying?
Are you hungry?
Stop trying to drive you this stuff.
Cyber tips coming in from the National Center for Missing and Exploited.
Bark turns over these potential child predators to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Using the app has led to arrests like this one in Florida last year.
The brutal reality is that a predator doesn't have to be in the same room, building, or even country to abuse a child. Libby and Bailey may not be real, but they represent countless children who are being sexually and psychologically abused, both online and in real life. I think about how I would have felt as a young, impressionable child. I would have kept the abuses to myself for fear of being shamed and blamed. I would have suffered with it secretly and quietly.
Hi, did you have a good day? Yeah.
I was wondering, so in 2 more days you're gonna come back?
That's right.
I love you.
I love you too.
Our work has led to numerous arrests, but it's a drop in the bucket. Our work, nor the work of law enforcement or legislation, will ever be able to protect children as well as engaged parents and guardians can. When asked, my advice for parents is to talk to your kids early and often, know what apps they're using and with whom they're communicating. When facing crisis, kids need a soft place to land.
All right. I know that video is very heavy.
Make sure they know they can come to you for help.
There we go. Okay. So let's take a deep breath. I know it's a lot to watch, but it's the reality of what kids are facing. This is not like a sensationalized thing by any means. I just took care of a 14-year-old patient a few weeks ago. And her dad, she had snuck out to meet this adult male. And her dad said, I looked through her phone and she's talking to over 30 adult males. And he said, how does she know how to say all these disgusting things to adult males? Like she's looking at pornography, or these adult males, exactly like you were saying on there, are telling her what to say. They're teaching her. And so we're seeing this all the time, that it's grooming, it's teaching kids that sexual exploitation is normal. So here's the reality. We would never drop our kids off at a park at midnight, all alone, like push them out of the car, good luck, at a park full of sexual predators, right? Like that already should give us anxiety of like, who would do that? But we give kids phones with 0 parameters. They have them all night in their bedroom and no one's checking to see what's happening. There are way more sexual predators online than there would be at that park, right? So maybe there's that there's not the physical interaction. They're still super vulnerable online and they are being inundated. I think what strikes me every time I watch that video is how she said it took 5 of us to keep up with all of these predators full time pretending to be the 15-year-old. Can you imagine what that would do to your brain at 15 if that many adult males are inundating you? Could you focus at school? Could you get your homework done? Like, absolutely not. No wonder there is such a huge mental health crisis with our kids today. This is just one facet of the multiple things they are trying to navigate online. So I don't think that these are bad kids. I don't think these are bad parents. I think there is just a huge lack of awareness around all of this. And unfortunately, when we realize what's going on, it's because we're reacting to some kind of traumatic event that's taken place. So who are the main offenders in terms of apps? Honestly, it's impossible to narrow it down. What we know is that if there is an app that kids are on where you can, directly message someone or send pictures or videos, there's going to be predators on there. But sort of the main offenders, I would say that we see Snapchat, there's nothing good happening on there. I cannot tell you the amount of kids I've seen that have been trafficked, met predators, been sexually abused, had horrific images of them, shared on there. We took care of a teenage girl who was drugged and raped by a boy at her school. She did not remember that happened to her. When she got to school the next day, her assault had been shared on Snapchat and everyone at school knew that she had been raped before she knew what happened. That is horrible. That is so traumatic. And that is what happens with apps like that, unfortunately. Omegle is another one. So if you're not familiar with this app, it's where you video chat and they just pair you with a random stranger. So you could be a 13-year-old. And with all these apps, you just have to click a box saying, yes, I'm this age. Like there's no verification whatsoever. So yes, I'm this age. And then you can just get paired with, a random stranger, a random adult male who's video chatting with you. Heard lots of horror stories of parents walking into the room and they're 9, 10-year-old is naked in front of this video talking to this adult on Omegle who's asking them to do things. Discord, we see lots of predation happening on there. Instagram, I took care of a 17-year-old who was being trafficked through a hotel on the plaza a few weeks ago. Her assault by her buyer was being live streamed on Instagram. TikTok for sure, lots of predation, lots of trafficking happening through there as well. So there are not apps that are quote unquote safe. If a kid is on there, if there's a way to message them, I promise there's going to be predators and traffickers on there. But as technology is moving so fast, we're also seeing trends starting to change. So AI is creating a whole new market of vulnerabilities. So there's a few things I think to be aware of with this. For one, AI is going to be able to create profiles that are targeting kids at higher numbers. But what we also see is that deep fakes are being created. So there's this huge trend of sextortion that's happening right now, especially with high school boys, where you have a high school boy who's online. You have someone pretending to be a teenage female who's messaging them and saying, oh, you're so cute, blah, blah, blah. Send me a nude picture. So this high school boy's like, okay, I'm interested. He sends a picture and suddenly that person's saying, just kidding, I'm a 45-year-old male. Now, if you don't send me $5,000, I'm gonna send this to all the contacts in your phone. So now you're a 14-year-old boy and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't want my parents to see this. I don't want people at school to see this. I don't have $5,000. What do I do? So we've seen this horrific increase in suicides with boys who are being sextorted because they don't know what to do and they are ashamed to tell someone what's going on. But what we see, what's happening is that deep fakes are being created. So basically what that means is that AI can take your face, I bet all of us, our faces are online somewhere. They can put it on a body that is in pornography and it looks exactly like you. So they can say, hey, I have this nude image of you. It's not even you, but it looks like it. Now send me $5,000, right? So that's a trend that we're seeing that's happening is people aren't even sending nude images, but it's becoming very easy to create and look real. So sextortion is a huge trend that's happening with kids and adults as well. So this is kind of what I was talking about. It's a horrific trend. So we know pornography and sex trafficking, they are so linked, it's impossible to separate the two of them. Pornography is almost always a factor with people who are being trafficked. It's always created of them. So if you're not aware, I know a lot of people are wondering, like, how do you find someone that's being trafficked? Most people who are being trafficked are being advertised on escort sites online. So sites like, one's called Mega Personals, one is called Skip the Games. You can go to it, you can type in Kansas City, you can see all the ads. You literally just click on them and you, in like 5 seconds, can contact someone who's being trafficked. Of course, on there, it's gonna say, I don't have a trafficker, right? Like all this language so that they're not gonna get in trouble, quote unquote, or their trafficker is not going to. But I would not recommend going on these sites because it is all pornography. Basically, it's just all the body parts of the people who are being sold for sex so buyers can decide if they want to pay for sex or not. So traffickers, absolutely, creating pornography so they can use it as an advertisement of who they are trafficking. Of course, people in pornography are being trafficked. So like Megan's story I was telling you, she was 16 when that happened to her. She could not consent to that. But if you think about it, there's also a lot of forced fraud and coercion in the porn industry. So imagine a girl shows up to a porn set, she's consenting to it at first, and then the director says, actually, we're gonna have this horrible scene happen to you. These 2 guys are gonna do this rape scene to you. And she's like, no, I didn't sign up for that. And then the director's like, okay, well then we won't pay you, or you'll never work in this industry again, or whatever may happen. That's coercion, right? So now she's feeling forced into the scene she didn't agree to and is being paid for it. That is the definition of trafficking. And so we don't know when we're watching porn if someone is being trafficked or not, but it happens all the time. It's shown, especially to kids, to groom them of, hey, see, it's normal for adults and kids to have sex. This is what's expected of you. This is how you should do the sex act. About 90% of women who were purchased for sex in a study said the buyers showed them pornography prior to being bought. So we see a lot of sex buyers, they are addicted to pornography because they want to act out the fantasies they're watching. They're like, okay, well, I could just pay someone to do this to me. So they're saying to the girls that are being trafficked, this is exactly what I want. I actually talked to a former sex buyer yesterday, and he was telling me that, and he got caught, all kinds of things happened. He has not been engaging in this for about 40 years, but he said, absolutely, I was addicted to pornography. That's why I was paying for sex. It escalated to the point where he attempted to rape a girl in a parking lot because that was the fantasy he had in his head. So these things absolutely influence one another. So what do you look for? If you are taking care of a kid, if you know a kid, if you're interacting with kids, who maybe are being exploited, groomed, trafficked. What does that look like? So kind of thinking through social media, if you're looking through their apps, if you're checking on their social media, is someone talking to them in a sexual way, obviously huge red flag. Are they asking the kid for nude images? Is there someone, an adult especially, or someone who is just liking every single one of their posts, always commenting, someone who is grooming them, making them feel seen? Is there someone who is sending naked images of themselves? Are they pretending to be younger? Are they offering the kid something? Hey, again, like, I'll send you a gift card if you do this. I'll buy you this. I'll give you a ride, whatever it may be. I'll show you if you show me. We've seen things like pretending to work for a modeling agency. I actually saw an Instagram account of a girl who was working for a trafficker. Megan showed me this because she like very much understands this world. So this girl was working for a trafficker. She would use a filter to make herself look much younger and say, I'll help you be an influencer. I'll help you get 700,000 followers, send me pictures, things like that. And she absolutely was helping this guy exploit these young girls. Using multiple false identities to contact a kid, threatening to create sexual images of a child or use ones kids have already sent. What do you look for with the kid? Maybe suddenly they're not interested in activities they were before. So this could apply to a kid who's either addicted to pornography, a kid who is being groomed, a kid who's being exploited. Maybe they don't want to go to soccer practice anymore. They're not interested in going to school anymore. Maybe they're shutting their device down real quick when you come around. They don't want you to see what's happening. You're seeing big changes in their language, their demeanor, their behavior. They might be in the bathroom for a long time because that's where they're sending images or communicating with this person that they don't want you to know about. Showing signs of depression and anxiety, suicidal ideations, and we see self-harm associated with this in huge numbers. So what does it look like with a kid specifically who's actually being trafficked, who is being sold for sex? I would say, again, kids are never going to tell you they're being trafficked. They don't know that word, like I told you with my patient at the beginning. We have to look for the signs and we have to screen adolescents. So like Liz was saying at the beginning, we use the evidence-based screening tool in our emergency department at Children's Mercy. And what we found is once we started asking kids the right questions, especially kids with high-risk behaviors, we've been identifying about 100 kids every year who are either high risk or we know are being trafficked just by asking the right questions. They're never going to say, being trafficked, this is happening to me, this person's targeting me. So we look at risk factors and we ask the right questions. So does this kid have an unstable home life? Are they running away from home? If so, why? Are they in foster care? Do they have a history of sexual abuse, or do they have a history of some kind of abuse or neglect? Do they have a mental health history, or is that why we're seeing them? Are they using alcohol or other substances? What about their reproductive history? That's definitely going to tell you a story. What was the age of their first sexual encounter? That's also correlated with being trafficked. Do they say that they're engaging in transactional sex or survival sex? Obviously, with a kid, that is trafficking. Is there some element of pornography happening in their world? Is it being created of them? Have they sent pornography? Are they in school anymore? If you're seeing multiple of these red flags, your brain should be thinking trafficking, 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 because I am sure there's some type of exploitation going on. So things we can do as healthcare workers, right? We have to have conversations about this. We have to talk with kids and their families about these things. If we avoid it, just like in Megan's situation, who else is going to do it? If we are seeing red flags, we need to talk about it. Here's the thing. You don't have to know everything to have a conversation, right? We know, and this is true anecdotally and true of research, talking to a teenager about pornography is not going to make them more curious. Guess what? They're already seeing it. So we might as well have a conversation about, hey, this is not actually what real sex is like. Let's talk about consent. Let's talk about healthy relationships. Let's talk about how dangerous strangulation is, right? If we don't have this conversation, no one may have it with them. Based on what's disclosed, obviously, we can offer guidance on healthy sexual relationships. We can talk to guardians about online safety. So like I was telling you, that 14-year-old whose dad was saying, she's talking to 30 adult men, like, what do I do? We chatted about pornography, about what apps he could put on her phone to help protect her. Actually, I was like, maybe just don't let her have her phone for a little while. I know it's going to be rough, but that might be a good protective mechanism. Giving resources for therapy. And again, if you're a healthcare worker, implementing a screening process, because again, asking those questions is really, really going to help see who's vulnerable and who's being exploited. So in terms of therapy, there are specific types of therapy that help, especially with kids with problematic sexual behavior. So kids who are addicted to pornography, maybe are acting out with harmful sexual behaviors. And Moxa actually offers these services for free, which is amazing. We know that when kids are able to get this type of therapy, the recidivism rate, so the rate at which they will reoffend, is very, very low. It's less than 3%. So that is a hopeful thing, that there are some solutions to this. I think some other things to remember is there are things that are natural teen stabilizers that are really good for them. It's good for them to sleep. Like, they don't need their phone in their bedroom at night. They really don't. It's good for them to sleep. It is good for them to be outside, to have friends in real life. It's good for them to be bored. It is good for their brains. So I think a lot of times when parents are like, oh, I don't want to set a parameter, they're going to freak out. It is good for them to take a breather from their device. It's for all of us to take a breather from devices. And again, I think even just having everyone keep their phones in one central place at night, that is going to just already take dozens of vulnerabilities off the table right there. So here are some resources, lots of great ones. There's a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures by a group called Defend Young Minds. It's written for little kids. It's about pornography. They never say the word pornography in it, so it's very age appropriate for parents or whoever to read with a kiddo, basically saying, hey, if you see someone online or a picture of someone where they're not wearing where a swimsuit should go, tell mom and dad. So that's an excellent resource for little kids. Culture Reframed, so they're an excellent organization. They have scripts already written for parents, for guardians, for tweens and teens. So if you're like, I don't know how to talk to a kid about this, it is already written for you. It's beautiful, it's free. We're actually currently working on resources for clinicians. So if you're a clinician, how do you talk to a kid about porn? What is the script doing? How do you screen for this? And it will be free. It won't be ready till 2024. Fight the New Drug has tons of good information. Protect Young Eyes is another good one where they talk about what kind of apps can help protect kids, what kind of filters. There's a great documentary on YouTube. It's free, called Raise on Porn, that connects porn, early porn usage, and paying for sex. And then there's another great TED Talk by Gail Dines, again, showing kind of what happens when a kid is exposed to porn at an early age, and sort of walks through how violent mainstream pornography is. And then some other things. So there's a website called Take It Down. If a child has nude images or videos online, this helps take them down, because that's clearly child pornography, it's child sexual abuse material. Even if the kid created it, it's still child pornography. So that helps remove that. It's really important for us to have legislation around this. So I was talking about at the beginning, I have tried 5 years in a row now in Missouri to get bills passed that would basically block explicit material online for kids. For adults, adults are allowed to do whatever they want. That's protected First Amendment right for adults, but for kids, it's not protected for them to see pornography, right? And we're seeing the huge ramifications. No legislators want to get on board with this, which is really interesting. And so I think the more we can push things to say, hey, we don't want kids to see this. This is hurting their brains, it's hurting their bodies, it's hurting their relationships. Bark, that's who created that video we watched. It's a great website. You can see the different things they offer, but basically it provides protection on devices. So it'll tell parents like, hey, this kid is having a conversation about suicide, or there's a predator who's talking to them, or whatever it may be, which can really help, because it can be a full-time job as a parent, right? To look through a kid's phone. Like, it's exhausting. A lot of parents are like, I don't have time at the end of the night to like see everything that's going on in their phone. Another option is there's a phone called a Gab phone, where you can set the parameters. So it's like, you can only text and call people. So you can get a ride home from practice, but guess what? We are not going to let you be on Snapchat. Like, you can really have a lot of sort of control over what goes on with protecting kids. So one of the nonprofits that today is, we talked about at the beginning, Stop Trafficking Project, that I would love for donations to go to. They're doing incredible work. So they have tons of resources on their website around all of this. They have a resource page, but they also go to schools and talk to kids about this in a really age appropriate, like the kids love them way, which is a gift to have, to be able to connect with that demographic, that population, especially about this topic, to get buy-in from them, incredible. So that's definitely something, if you're like, hey, could someone come talk to my kid's school? Yes. And I think really having conversations early and often. I heard someone say, if your kids are not finishing your sentences around all of this, you're not talking about it enough. So I think absolutely, we do not want the conversation to be when there's a kid who's already been sexually assaulted, we're in the ER, we're in this crisis mode, that this is the first time we're talking about any of this stuff. So here's my contact information. If you have questions about screening tools, about any of this information, any of the studies I shared, whatever may be, I'm happy to share. I want to help and empower. There's tons more hours of this content that we could talk about, but I really wanted to connect the dots for sort of the current trends that we are seeing. So with that, I think we have a little bit of time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Heidi, we have a question online for
Yeah.
you. This person is, it was anonymous, so I can't credit the writer.
Sure.
There's a fair amount of effort to legalize sex work locally and nationally. How would legalization impact sex trafficking?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we look at almost every place that I can think of where sex work has been legalized, it increases trafficking because what happens is it increases demand. So if you think about it, most people don't want to work in prostitution, right? Actually, I would say probably everyone, if they're being honest. And so what happens is we say, okay, this is a free-for-all. There's no consequences for buyers or for traffickers. Traffickers aren't going away. They still want to make money if we legalize it. And so what happens is they're like, well, there's more buyers now because there's no consequences for them. We can't find enough people who will voluntarily do this work. And so we're going to force more people into it. So we actually see trafficking skyrocket every time it's been legalized because this is not a job that people voluntarily want to do. The reality is that if you look at what happens to people in sex work, there is a massive amount of rape, robbery, substance use, STIs, pregnancy. I mean, just the rates of women that get murdered who are in prostitution or sex work are higher than any other demographic of women in the world. Like if you truly look at it for what it is, nobody would sign on to this if they truly had informed consent. And so I think the reality and sort of what we hear when people are saying it's empowering or this is kind of what I'm choosing to do, what we see with a lot of people sort of making those claims is that they have a long history of childhood sexual abuse and it is them recreating their trauma. They want to gain mastery over that trauma. So to them, it feels like a choice when in reality, this is a lot of unprocessed trauma coming up. So yeah, I would say research bears out that legalizing sex work has not worked in terms of protecting victims. What I would say is I don't think there should be consequences for people who are being trafficked. So what we see like in the United States currently is there are women who are being trafficked and they're charged with prostitution and they end up getting, felonies on their records and are absolutely traumatized by our criminal justice system because they're treated as criminals. I don't think that should exist, but I don't think we should say it's a free-for-all for traffickers and buyers. It just doesn't work like that. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
I don't have a mic, but I'll talk pretty loud. Here. Okay. Thank you. So like, as I'm listening, I have a 13-year-old daughter and I'm like, oh my gosh. So
terrifying.
Like I immediately want to get on my phone and like text my daughter, so it is overwhelming and as many conversations because you want to remain having a trusting relationship with them. And it is so sensitive to have them trust you, but at the same time protect them.
Yes.
So as a mother to a 13-year-old, where like it can be overwhelming to where to start. So where would you recommend mothers starting that process of making, because we do check her phone, but as I understand, there are apps that can hide things and it is kind of a daunting process if you're not looking at it every minute of the day.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend to somebody in my
Great question. And yes, I apologize. I'm sure I overwhelmed everyone. I know it's like a fire hose just coming at you. So yes, I think one is if we can approach it with curiosity and not shame, there's going to be a much better dialogue. So it's not like, I think you're a bad kid and like, this is happening on your phone. More like, hey, I heard this presentation today. Like, have you seen any of these things? I'm just curious. Like kind of, I had a SANE nurse I worked with and she was like, I don't know if this is really happening, when I gave this presentation. So she asked her 14-year-old daughter, like, do kids talk about porn at school? And she's like, oh yeah, do you mean like nudes we're sending each other or Pornhub? Okay, so, like it's happening. It's just, I think as adults sometimes we're afraid to bring it up. So I say, if you can just ask questions with curiosity, you're not in trouble. I'm just curious. Can you help me like understand the lay of the land? Have you ever seen anything online that's been scary or freaked you out? I'm not mad at you. I'm truly just trying to figure out kind of what's going on. I think if we can approach it that way, where we don't feel like, oh, we don't trust you online, because kids are not the problem. It's all the predators and everyone, all these industries that are grooming them. I think also being able to find filters, apps, whatever it may be, that are helping assist you parent, right? So if you can put something like Bark on their phone to just say, hey, again, it's not because I don't trust you. There's so many creeps out there and I don't want them to hurt you. We're going to put this on your phone. You're not in trouble by any means. This is to help protect you. I think sort of framing it that way helps take out some of the like pushback of like, mom, you don't, making them feel like they're the problem. They're not the problem. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
So I'd kind of heard that little bit about stuff about pornography affecting especially males.
Yeah.
And then you hear about people like Andrew Tate and things like that. What what can we do about? I mean, obviously it's a problem.
Yeah.
Obviously we don't want it to be a problem. We don't want it to affect
yeah
normal sexual relationships
Yeah.
as they get older. But then we have this free market and people are allowed to do what they do. And then I've heard stories, I don't know how much this is true, versus like, sometimes they might catch somebody who, okay, clearly this child's underage, we're going to shut that down. But then it's like, oh, they just opened something else up. So I want it to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. It's overwhelming because it feels like, how do you take on this like massive problem that is societally accepted and normalized? And again, we have free speech protecting this with adults. So that's like something we can't even really touch right now. But you're right, it is absolutely creating more sexual assault, more demand for sex trafficking. It, like you were saying with Andrew Tate, like creating these ideals of masculinity that are really harmful. I think kind of what we can do is just take it a bite at a time, and are we having conversations with each other, with our colleagues? Morgan, would you like to jump in? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think this room is full of women, and I think probably a lot of participants are women. We have to engage the men in these children's lives as well, and engage them in this education. I know that my fiance having these discussions with our 4 kids feels uncomfortable, but after I've talked to him and been like, we have to tell them that this porn that they might see isn't really what life is like. He's like, whoa. Yeah, that's true. So engaging the men in these kids' lives is also really, really important so that they hear it from a trusted male source in their life. Also, if you have somebody clinically that you're worried about, we have a team at KU, and that's my team.
Yes.
My name's Morgan. I'm the forensic program supervisor. If you have any questions, you just call the ED, have them get a hold of one of us, and we can have these conversations with patients. Because I'm sure right now you're like, I don't know what to do. I could never do this. There's resources.
Thank you. Yeah, great answer. And I agree. I think in short, talking about it, and I think bringing men into the conversation is huge. I actually talked to the guy I was telling you about that was telling me about how he had paid for sex and all these things. That's what he was talking about, was masculinity, is men need to be saying this to boys. Yeah.
Our time has come to the end.
I apologize.
But perhaps you two can meet out in the hallway. Sure. This has been a great presentation, Heidi.
Yes.
I'm just going to reiterate. Truly wonderful. Again, group of people here and online, and I know there's men online too. So we're all looking for solutions. This conference, I'm going to remind, this conference is being offered free. So please, if you can find it in your heart to give a donation to the Giving Fund, it will benefit 2 organizations that are working hard to support victims and to stop trafficking. So if you can find it in your heart to give a little to that fund, it will go directly to those 2 organizations.